outbreak is getting worse, with over 636 cases confirmed so far this year. Although this may seem like a small number, many health officials are quite worried and predict that rates will continue to rise. Many cases of the measles are centered around two areas, the Pacific Northwest and New York. In addition, there are several hotspots around the country where parents are opting their children out of vaccines. What's changing is that some adolescents are now seeking advice on how to get caught up on shots without parental consent. In some states, it's very easy to get vaccinated without parental consent. However, the laws greatly vary depending on where you live. But why are we even talking about measles when the CDC said it was eradicated in 2000? Let's talk to Dr. Trevor Graydon, PhD III, to get his take on the situation. So, Dr. Graydon, what is your opinion on the measles outbreak?
Well, this is obviously very concerning because we're seeing a growing number of states allow non-medical exemptions from vaccines for reasons of personal or philosophical beliefs. And I'm not for it. Not for it at all.
There are currently about 600 confirmed cases. Why should we be so concerned about such a small number?
Well, although this number may seem small, our eyes should be fully open to this awful situation. In some areas, we have up to 30% of kids who are not vaccinated. And since measles is a very contagious disease, infants who aren't yet exposed to the virus can catch it from unvaccinated children.
Ugh, I cannot believe you guys watch this crap. The media is so biased nowadays.
But Aunt Betty, vaccines are actually really important and really effective, especially the measles vaccine.
Well, Megan, in my opinion, vaccines don't work. Multi-million-dollar pharmaceutical companies just want you to think they work, when in reality, all you need are some essential oils and a healthy vegan diet to protect you. Like Donald Trump said, children are not horses. We can't just stick them with needles and pump them full of science juice. It's not natural and it's not safe. Isn't that right, honey? Steve, wake up!
Yes, honey. Whatever you say, honey.
Oh, Kurt. See, even your Uncle Steve agrees with me.
Aunt Betty, Uncle Steve, it's essential that as a nation we recognize the importance of vaccination. Otherwise, we will face many dangers to public health and safety. Here, read this book. It explains everything.
Oh my god, this is way too thick. How the heck am I supposed to read this?
That's okay, Aunt Betty. Here, let me show you. Just a few generations ago, people lived under constant threat of infections and deadly diseases such as smallpox, yellow fever, polio, and hepatitis. But thanks to vaccines, most of these diseases have been eradicated from the developed world. The first discovery of vaccines occurred in 1796 when British doctor Edward Jenner discovered that if he infected people with a related, though benign version of the cowpox virus, he could inoculate patients and make them immune. 85 years later, Louis Pasteur used this knowledge to create the first lab-made vaccinations against cholera and rabies. So how does a vaccine work, and what goes into a vaccine? Well, a vaccine works by training the immune system to recognize and combat pathogens without actually infecting the human body. To do this, molecules called antigens from the pathogens must be introduced into the body to trigger an immune response. Before diving into how a vaccine works, let's take a look at how the immune system functions in the human body. The human body encounters a pathogen. The first line of defense is the skin. The skin acts as an external barrier against pathogens. Your body also secretes substances like mucus, sweat, tears, and earwax to provide general protection from invaders. If a pathogen breaks through the skin and into the body, then the second line of defense is utilized. Big cells called macrophages will intervene. An army of intruders is sighted, and macrophage will devour up to 100 of the invader cells at a time and digest them. If the macrophages are overwhelmed and need help, they can trigger the inflammatory response, which releases fluid into the battlefield to make fighting easier. Once the macrophages fight for too long, they call in neutrophils, which release toxins that kill both invader cells and healthy cells. If this is still not enough, the macrophages will call on the brain of the immune system, the almighty dendritic cell. The dendritic cell will take in enemy cells through endocytosis, gobble them up, and present the pieces of the broken down pathogen on the outside of their cell membrane. These pieces are called antigen markers. Next, the dendritic antigen-presenting cell will travel into the lymph node where it will encounter a helper T cell that has special receptors on its cell membrane which match the antigen on the dendritic cell. Once the receptors on the T cell come into contact with the antigen on the dendritic cell, the helper T cell is activated. The helper T cell quickly begins to secrete cytokines which activate B cells and killer T cells. B cells make antibodies, which are tiny Y-shaped proteins that neutralize virus cells and trigger apoptosis. Some special B cells, called memory B cells, travel the body constantly looking for antigens. When the antigen is encountered again, memory B cells trigger the immune response immediately. Helper T cells also activate killer T cells, which destroy virus-infected cells. Some T cells become memory T cells, which become activated if the virus is encountered a second time. Now, let's talk about measles and how it affects the human body. Measles enter the body through the eyes, nose, or mouth. It is a virus that spreads through the air, meaning if someone carries the measles disease and you come into contact with them, you have a 90% chance of contracting the measles from them if you are not vaccinated. Now, measles is a virus, meaning that it cannot reproduce on its own and needs to infect host cells to make copies of itself. Once measles enters the body, it infects the macrophages, turning them into large measles production factories. Luckily, the human body has defense mechanisms called natural killer cells, which patrol the body and search for infected cells. Once they encounter an infected cell, they use cell signaling to order the infected cell to kill itself, halting viral production. This process of measles-fighting macrophages can go on for up to 10 days. During those 10 days, you probably won't show any symptoms, but you can still infect others. Once those 10 days are up, the macrophage cells call on the almighty dendritic cell for help, but instead, the measles virus infects the dendritic cell and uses it as a disguise to get further into the lymph node. Once the infected dendritic cell arrives in the lymph node, it infects the T and B cells. This is where things start happening very quickly. The lymph system carries the measles throughout the whole body and into the bloodstream. The measles begins to infect several organs like the spleen, lungs, intestines, liver, and in some cases even the brain. At this stage, you may start exhibiting symptoms like headaches, a high fever, a rash, and bronchitis. In some very extreme cases, the measles can reach your brain, causing swelling and a brain infection, which can lead to death or long-term brain damage. The most common way to die from measles is by catching pneumonia. This is because the measles virus has completely decimated your immune system, allowing other bacteria and viruses to infect your lungs. But there is still hope. Some dendritic cells are able to survive and activate B and T cells. The killer T cells can now fight back, and in about 2 to 3 weeks, your body will triumph over the measles, making you immune. However, your immune system is incredibly weak and may take months to recover, leaving you vulnerable to more diseases.
But wait a minute, I read a study somewhere that said vaccines cause autism.
Chuck it, ma'am! Just chuck it! Hi, I'm Dr. Trevor Graydon, PhD III. A study that she's referring to was published in 1997 by British surgeon Andrew Wakefield. The article was published in The Lancet, a prestigious medical journal, suggesting that the measles, mumps, rubella, MMR, vaccine was increasing autism in British children. The paper has since been completely discredited due to serious procedural errors, undisclosed financial conflicts of interest, and numerous ethical violations. Andrew Wakefield lost his medical license and the paper was retracted from The Lancet. Nonetheless, the study was taken seriously by several people around the world, and several other major studies were conducted. None of them found a link between any vaccine and the likelihood of developing autism.
Wow, I had no idea. Gosh, that was real stupid of me to even consider opting my future kids out of vaccinations. I'm a total klutz. Now I know if I opt my kids out of vaccines, I'm putting many others at risk of potentially fatal diseases. Thank you, Megan, and thank you, Dr. Trevor Graydon, PhD III, for helping me see the error in my ways.
It's okay, Betty. It only happens to the absolute worst of us. So as you can see, ladies and gentlemen, measles is no joke. And making the decision to not stay up to date on vaccines puts you and the general population at risk. Opting out of vaccines isn't more natural or more safe. In fact, vaccines have been proven time and time again to be effective agents in eradicating disease. If you aren't up to date on shots, or you know someone who is, go to your local doctor's office and get vaccinated today. Together, we can consign measles to its rightful place, the history books.